Paul, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Really interested to hear your story and learn from you today in terms of how you've been able to build resilience and some of the lessons you learned through your own personal experiences. And now, how are you sharing that with others? Because that's always something that fascinates me because it's part of that hero's journey, right? So you go through this experience yourself, but then if you don't do anything with it, it feels like there's not a lot of meaning in that experience. So I'm always curious to hear how people are and creating it for themselves. So I know we'll jump into all of that, but before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here today.
Yeah, Furkan, thanks for having me, most importantly. But the reason that brought me here today is I feel that my story can help others. And that is my primary interest in doing all of this, is to help others. And the people that I'm trying to help are all inclusive, but my message is, at least initially here, is focused on teenagers and young adults, because I think they need the most help of the different age groups that we deal with. So I'm leaning towards right now helping the teenagers and young adults, because again, I think they need it.
Yeah. And let's maybe expound on that. Like, why do you think out of all the demographics, it's the teenagers and young adults? I definitely have my own perspective in terms of some of the challenges we're seeing in society today and the risks associated with that age group. But I'm also curious to understand your perspective and why is that such a focus for you? And then maybe even getting into how are they responding to your message? So a couple of questions there, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the reason why I wanted to focus initially on the young adults is because I feel that I needed most help back then. Because I grew up in a home with domestic violence, and there were incidents that made me black out for years, a lot of years. There was an incident in particular that I blacked out, and I don't remember much after that. Many of the stories that were told to me were told by my sisters, because I didn't remember them. I was there, I was in the same room, but I had no recollection of them. I feel that teenagers are struggling from so many things, and not just domestic violence in particular. It's digital bullying with and cyberbullying and all the pressures that they have for academic performance. Just my son, as an example, just graduated college, but he was elected captain of the football team his senior year. And he was under so much pressure, not because of just being elected the football captain, but before school that year, he threw up every day before school. He lost pounds because all the pressure he was under, not just because of being elected the captain of the football team, but because all the pressure he was under to do better, to get better grades, so he can get a better scholarship. Those are some of the struggles that these teenagers are going through. I feel it's important to provide them some support, because again, back then when I was that age, I was on my own, I was unsupervised, and I needed a lot of help. And I think there are kids today, or teenagers today, need a lot of help. So that's why I'm focusing in that area.
Yeah. And how's the response been?
Yeah, fairly well. You always want more. I do public speaking in front of high schools and other audiences, and you always want more people to come up to you afterwards and to talk to you. But they're very receptive of the message, because I think they feel that they understand it. Because the message is, I have three different really messages in my speech, and one of them is speaking up. Because again, I didn't speak up. I had all the opportunities to speak up, but I didn't, because I was embarrassed, or I thought it was normal. Or most of us don't speak up because of how we'll be judged of somebody with a problem. And the second thing that I talked to them about is getting involved, because I was involved in sports and football, and it saved my life. It surely did. And you develop character and valuable life skills, and you're able to build self-confidence and self-esteem. And that's the second message. And the third one is really embracing self-discovery, taking that first step out of our comfort zones. Because Nobody is an example. I took my action. I took my first step, that uncomfortable step, with therapy. And, nobody wants to go to therapy and say, I have a problem. I talk to them about taking that step out of our comfort zone. And when you do these three things, you're taking action, which then builds resilience. So that's the message to the students. And I think they pick up on it very well. Somebody had mentioned to me just the other day, and it made sense to me, is although they may not get the message on that particular day, it may be down the road that the message rings a bell and helps them. I always want to hear more or feel that I'm making more connection, but there's always the residual effect that'll happen later on.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because as you were sharing that, it did resonate, because that's one of the approaches I'm taking with my son too, is you plant the seed. And I think sometimes we get too attached to the outcome, that just because we feel like it's the right thing to do, we almost want to force that onto them. But just planting the seed, and as they're growing older, they're getting so much information that they're absorbing. So how can you plant that seed and let it marinate for a while and see what comes out for them? But that's how they build that autonomy, right? And I think, to your point, you may not get the response right away, but as it percolates over time, then you see them absorbing that information and then making sense of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As you said, as I had said earlier, you always want to hear more and making more connections. And one of the things that I did in my book, which is being released, I didn't mean to get into this, but I think it's on the same topic, is in my book, I have a Rise and Resilience Challenge where teenagers who engage can earn points for different activities of speaking up, being involved, and embracing self-discovery. And there's different activities that I have listed where you can gain points. And you gain those points, then you can purchase promotional items and t-shirts and mugs and so forth. So that'll give me, I only mention that because that'll give me a better feel for how I am impacting or interacting with the teenagers.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do want to dive into some of the things you've shared here, especially the 3 steps, and starting with the speaking up, because you mentioned in your own example that you were blacking out. So that was your response to those difficult situations. And I think that's where that fight or flight or freeze can kick in for a lot of us. And it's easier if we don't have the regulating techniques or the coping mechanisms. We will disassociate from time to time. And then that trauma can just stay with us and show up in different ways. So I am curious for yourself, as you said, you weren't speaking up. How was that showing up as a consequence in your life?
And not in good ways, because I was acting out, but it wasn't being recognized. And there's many things. As an example, my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, and they had Barbie dolls. And I ripped the heads off of every Barbie doll and flushed them down the toilet. I was searching. I was, and where it ended, I think what ended up happening is, after my parents divorced at the age of 12, I went into drugs and alcohol. That's how I escaped. That's how I got rid of the pain. I just suppressed it. And I suppressed it for 30 years, from the age of 5 when I saw the one incident until 35, until I took that first step in that action. So it was 30 years that I just went through the motions. I was just going through the motions on autopilot. It's not like I wasn't functioning in society. I got married. I had 2 kids. I had a good job, but I was lost. I was totally lost, and I was just going through the motions on and not autopilot. What's next? College or in high school, I liked my physics class, so I majored in physics. My sister went to a teaching school. I followed her to a teaching school. It was just going through the motion, no thought, no consultation. And then I got out of college. I was playing rugby for 12 years. I was into drugs and alcohol. I ended up getting married and having 2 kids, and ended up walking out on that family because of not taking care and not getting to the bottom of what was really the pain that I was hiding behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think so many people can relate to that because when we're escaping that pain, it's either we're seeking that pleasure or we're trying to escape it. Right. And often it can manifest as just being on autopilot, as you're sharing. You're just going through the motions of life without really being aware of what's going on in the inside. And connecting with that internal self is so crucial because then you become aware of some of the pain you're carrying around and how it's being projected out into the world. Like you said, you made some choices in life, but what was that turning point for you? What was it that allowed you to then say to yourself, okay, this is something I need to address?
Yeah, I don't know if there was anything in particular because
Mm.
I had DUI. I could have died so many times
Mhm.
during this course of this bad behavior. But what had happened was I started therapy. I got to a point where I thought that I can't continue like this. In the background, my sister, after she graduated college, she was 2 years older than me, became a youth minister.
Hmm.
And my mother was somewhat affiliated with the church. So there was always the background behind me and some rumblings of spirituality and so forth. So when I started therapy, the therapist, it was apparent to her that I didn't remember anything.
Yeah.
So the therapist contacted my mother and said, "You better write Paul a letter because he doesn't remember anything." So my mother wrote me a letter and it provided me some context of when things happened and what happened, and that helped. So the therapy in this letter helped. And then my mother had given me a book 2 years earlier called 101 Ways to Transform Your Life by Dr. Wayne Dyer. It's really a compilation of many of his writings, but I started listening to that book. It was a cassette tape
Mhm.
back then, but I started listening to this tape, which talks a lot about spirituality and you're much more than what and so forth. But that book, getting some information and getting therapy, I started to break out of that fog a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
And then things started to happen because I broke down that barrier that I was hiding behind and for so long. So, as I mentioned, things started to happen. The day that I told my wife and kids my wife knew, but the day that I told my kids that I was leaving, was the hardest thing I ever did.
Mhm.
4 and 6 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And the day that I told them, I was in IT and I was assigned to a project in Cleveland. So I go to Cleveland that day, and the project site was right next to a church. Now, I never used to go to church, never had much interest in church, but I went over to Mass at lunch hour a few times, the power hour, as some call it.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing a letter to the priest. And I wrote a letter to the priest saying, "I'm going through this change. I just left my wife and kids. I'm in this dark place with drugs and alcohol." And I ended up meeting with the priest. And the priest said, "Just pray." He said, "Just pray. What is it that you want from me right now, oh Lord?" Okay. So I left with that. And a couple months later, I'm sitting at a bar, drowning my sorrows, and it's very busy, patrons everywhere, a couple bartenders helping everyone out. And there's a DJ playing music behind me. And I'm sitting there and I look at this bottle of vodka behind the bar and I say, "What is it that you want from me right now, oh Lord?" And as I said that, the DJ behind me said, "Yes, that is God." All right. I didn't need to turn around. I didn't need to. I knew he was talking to me. Another time, and again, this all happened over a course of 2 or 3 years.
Mhm.
This wasn't all happened in one day. I was in this busy public area by the beach, and it was very busy. And was looking for a place to pray this
Yeah.
day. And again, I don't always look for a place to pray, but something this day was telling me to look for a place to pray. So I said, "I'm in this busy area. I'll drive down the close coastal road and see if I can find a place." So I'm driving down the road and come around this bend, and I see this big opening that overlooks the ocean. So I pull my car down and I said, "Maybe this will be it." And I come walking up and I see this circular formation in the ground outlined with rocks. It was a labyrinth. It's have been used for thousands of years as a spiritual tool for meditation and reflection. And the labyrinth has one way in and one way out. So I started walking through this labyrinth. And when I got to the center of the labyrinth, there was this little pile of rocks. And sticking out of this pile of rocks was a crucifix of Jesus. And this overlooks the ocean and a lighthouse. And this lighthouse flashes 143. The light flashes 143 for I love you. So somebody was trying to tell me something. And then September 12th, 1998, I quit drinking. And it's been 26 years since I've had a drink. Now, again, that all occurred because I took that first uncomfortable step to the therapist. But I also broke down all those barriers that I was hiding behind and let myself feel. And when I did that, I opened up my heart and my mind to what I was feeling. And that was love. Yeah. Love for myself and love for others, love for the world around me. It was really transformational. That's my awakening. But like I said, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and you have to be receptive. And that was the biggest change that I made. I broke down those barriers and I was receptive. Yeah. And when you're receptive, that allows things to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I agree with you. It's very important to highlight the fact that you have to be receptive because, to your point, those things are always happening. But when we're receptive, we can actually observe them, right? So those moments of being called upon or getting those messages. And for the outsider, it may seem, what is he talking about? Like, how is that even real? But to your point, when you're receptive, you're able to receive it for yourself. And it doesn't matter whether or not it lands for other people. So I think your journey in itself is unique in the sense of how you receive these messages, but it's not unique in the sense that we all go through it, right?
Yes. Yeah. And what I want to take out of that is, and I sometimes feel guilty that I quit drinking like I did because it was a snap of the fingers. It was divine intervention. It wasn't something that I struggled over. And so many people struggle over addiction. And I get guilty because it was easy for me. It was like, I'm done. Yeah. I'm done. Because I knew the alternative. And the alternative is that I wouldn't be here. So yeah, that's why it was so important for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the guilt is because to you, it seems that it was a lot easier to let go of the alcohol as opposed to some other people. But I think there's an aspect of going back to being able to receive, right? When you're able to connect to that love that, as you were sharing, that's already inside of us, that's what makes it easier because then we're not seeking it through whatever behaviors we're engaging in, whether it's alcohol related or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the first things you have to do is really change your thoughts, change the way that you think. Yeah. And I was in a very low energy state. I was fearful. I was scared. Everything was ashamed. And not until I left those feelings go and shifted my thoughts from negative to positive and let go of that ego that society teaches us. Yeah. And when I was able to do those two things and that really helped me get to the place where I am.
For sure. Yeah. And how has that then helped your relationship with your children, right? Because to your point, they were fairly young when you decided to leave.
Yeah.
How have you been able to bridge that over the years and how has that relationship evolved?
Yeah, I have 6 kids who love me, but yeah, it took a while because they didn't know. My daughter came to my first speech at a high school. And I think she learned a lot then. She didn't know any of these things that we're talking about. And I told her that I could have been married to Marilyn Monroe and it wouldn't have mattered. Yeah. So I think that kind of helped them understand that it wasn't something personal. It was, but it wasn't. It was something that I had to do because otherwise I wouldn't be here because I had to change and it wouldn't have been as powerful. I don't know if that's the right word, but is that meaningful if I
Mhm.
would have stayed in a relationship that I was lost in and I wasn't feeling. I had to separate
Mhm.
to make that move. But it's a
Mhm.
shame. I heard some people and they understand now, to your point. They understand it, and
Mhm.
especially since they've heard the story and in different versions of it many times now. So I think from a therapist perspective, them getting that background, I think is probably helpful for them to understand maybe what I was going through.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also their experience of it is going to be completely different, and that's part of their journey to work through. And I think as parents, it's tough to find that right balance between focusing on our side of the street and not getting too worried about trying to fix it for them, because life does happen for all of us, right? And we may feel like we're responsible for what we handed them, but at the same time, it's part of their individual journey too. And each
Yeah.
child may have a completely different perspective and experience with it too, right? How do you maintain that balance for yourself where you're not getting too preoccupied with trying to also rescue them or fix it for them?
Just being honest, be
Yeah.
yourself, be truthful, because I think the more that you can be truthful and provide them uh, background is only going to help them
Mhm.
understand why things happen like they
Sure.
did. I remember when, after I had left, I don't, a couple of years after that, my ex-wife had me come over with the kids because they had questioned. They were like, "Why did you leave?"
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
at the time, this is before my awakening and and this is true. And because I married my mother,
Mhm.
therapy and
Mhm.
all that, so I realized I
Right.
married my mother because she wasn't around.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, I think it's about being honest, being truthful. And they understand if you're truthful and being honest and they see you being a better person, then I think it's easier for them to adapt and come to grips with what occurred. Because
Mhm.
I just walked out on them. I didn't provide any justification or
Mhm.
reason at the time, and it was very difficult for me because I grew up. This was in a domestic violence. My parents weren't around, and my father wasn't around, and that was difficult. It was
Mhm.
it is as hard as it was. It was it was difficult because I had gone through the experience and I knew that I was leaving my kids in a situation like similar, not similar, but without a father. And that hurt. That hurt for a number of years. But not until I had that awareness and awakening did I understand. Again, I was living in that fear, that shame, and all of that for so long because of what I was doing and what I had done. And I hadn't forgiven myself at that point. That's why the drugs and alcohol were a big part of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think there's that aspect of intergenerational trauma too, right? And I think to break the chain, which it sounds like you've done. Now, coming back to the whole idea of, in terms of the three things that you preach around getting involved, why is that important from your perspective? And you gave some examples around sports, but getting involved can look like many things, right? So let's maybe expand on why is that important for this demographic you're working with, like the young adult.
Yeah, I think there's several reasons. One, when we are and we're struggling with something, when we're depressed, struggling, what do? We self-isolate. That's what we
Mhm.
do. And that only makes things worse. So my message is to get involved. And as I said, I was involved in sports, and that was the community that saved my life. But what I mention is it doesn't matter what you're involved in. It could be sports. It doesn't matter. It could be the band. It could be the drama club, the debate club. It doesn't matter. It's about being involved so that you can develop relationships and you can build self-esteem. Because when you're involved, you're developing character and
Mhm.
valuable life skills. You're developing life skills like leadership skills, being able to motivate others, or problem solving skills, being able to develop solutions to problems. Like I had to come up with, how am I going to eat today? As an
Mhm.
example. You learn a lot of these valuable life skills problem solving skills, all of these skills when you're involved, and you're involved in different things. So by being involved, you develop this character and valuable life skills. And that's what I try to get across to the young adults is, again, if you're struggling with whatever, you tend to self-isolate. You tend to self-isolate, and that just makes things worse. And you have to be involved to develop this character and valuable life skills and self-esteem and confidence. And you can't do that by not being involved. You can't do that by sitting at the desk and whatever.
Yeah.
You have to be involved. You have to be socially, because that's what it does. It helps your social and your communication skills is one of the other benefits from it. If I would have self-isolated and not gone to football practice, because I walked to football practice for 3 years, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I walked 1 mile each way to practice. And and I did that because it was my family, and it's where I felt safe. But you have to be involved to develop character and be able to, again, the valuable life skills and the social and communication skills. That's what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things I'm hearing is it's that sense of community.
Yes.
So when we're isolating, we feel like we're the only ones going through whatever story we've created in our head, but that sense of community can be so powerful, right? And that's going back to the example you gave of the church too. The whole idea is to have a sense of community too, where you can go and feel like you belong, because otherwise the shame tricks us and it makes us think that we're the only ones going through this, and all those internal narratives we have around not being good enough, being a failure, whatever we're telling ourselves. But when you have that community, it can be really helpful.
Yes. Yeah. Most definitely. And yeah, I don't know if there's much more to add to that, but yes. Yeah,
absolutely. And then I know you've talked about the whole embracing self-discovery, and you shared your own example of going for therapy. But what are some of the ways you were able to build resilience? And is that something that's also shining through for your children as well, in terms of how they've dealt with the experience for themselves? Are you seeing that resilience come through?
I'm not sure if I've seen it in the kids just yet, but the resilience and the self-discovery. Resilience, many times you see the definition as the ability to bounce back after some traumatic event. But what it really is growing in the process, growing and learning with each adversity and each challenge that we face. That's how we grow. As an example, I use this as well because I think it's a good analogy. I'm a football fan and a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and our coach is Mike Tomlin. And it was preseason, and he was talking about putting the rookies into the preseason game against the all pros on the other team, a new guy against somebody that is well established. And he said, I put them in there and I challenged them. I challenged them because that's how they learn about themselves and that's how they get better. It's the same thing in life. You can't get better at things if you don't challenge yourself, if you don't put yourself out there. That's how you learn what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like and what you dislike. So you have to put yourself out there. And when you have these challenges and these adversities, they should be welcome in some respect. They should be welcome because, again, that's how you learn. So I had so much adversity that what I had discussed at first, that domestic violence and living on my own with little food and coming home from college to no home, they could have broken me. And they didn't. They built up my resilience. They only made me stronger. And because those challenges that I had early on in life, they helped me with later life's challenges. Because life is hard, as we know it. Life is about how hard you get hit and keep going. And that's how we win. That's what it is. It's just you have to keep going. You have that challenge that you think, oh my God, this thing is on you, and you get all upset about it. It's just a challenge to make you better. That's how you learn about yourself. That's the message is these challenges and adversities that we face, it's an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm hearing from you is when you're able to voluntarily expose yourself to challenging situations, whether you're playing sports or engaging in some other activity where you're being challenged, you're actually building up that ability to be resilient. So when involuntary things happen in life, as you said, you have the capacity to dig deep and know that, hey, I can deal with this.
That's
And
right.
the common overlapping theme here between what we talked about previously around getting involved and also this whole resilience piece is where I see personally the challenges with teenagers and young adults today is they're often isolating themselves and being stuck at home because the way we socially interact has changed significantly, right? You could sit at home and feel like you're socially engaged through your phone, you're talking to your friends, you're texting, you're sending videos, you're playing video games, but you're not really interacting socially. So you're not building those skills, you're not getting involved, and you're not really putting yourself in situations where you can actually build resilience. So you could see that becoming a significant challenge. But to your point, you need to expose yourself to these things because when life does get hard, with skills to fall back on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the social skills, I always say that going to college is not about just the books,
Mhm.
right? At least when I went to college, it was all communication. It was all interaction. That's how we learn.
Mhm.
And so it is. You have to get yourself out there, put yourself in social situations as opposed to hiding behind the screen or the phone or a video. Not to say that there isn't a lot of value in
Mhm.
some of that, but there is greater value in putting yourself out there in a social situation.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, coming back to your own life, I know you mentioned when you and I had chatted that you tried out a different type of therapy. I do want to expand on that because
Yeah.
one of the things you were struggling with was Lyme disease. Now, have you been able to understand why that happened and how were you able to deal with it?
Oh, I do know how it happened. I found a tick on me that was there for I don't know how many days because I was playing in the woods with my son, and it wasn't until 4 years after that, roughly 4 years after that, did I realize that I had Lyme disease, and by that time it had um, uh, infested my body. I lost 50% of my hearing. My body just ached up and down. My whole body ached. Cognitive issues, Lyme disease impacts greatly. And I had it for 5 years afterwards. So I had it for 3, 4 years. And then I was on antibiotics for 3 or 4 years trying to get rid of it. And then I finally just said, I've had enough. I was in a depressed state. Lyme disease in itself makes you depressed because it makes you feel so lonely and isolated. But going through 20 different antibiotics, three different at one time for 4 years took that toll on me. And I just said I had enough of the Lyme disease. And I was in a very bad state at this point. I was depressed. I was also, after we talked about my first marriage that I got divorced, my second marriage was in a very bad state at this point. My wife was emotionally abusive, cheating on me, and so forth. So I have Lyme disease. I'm in this bad situation in a relationship, and I was staring at the walls for days.
Mhm.
I was self-isolating, like we talked about. I didn't do anything. And I came across my sister, her son went to school with someone, and his mother owned a place in Florida called the Healing House. It was in Orlando,
Yeah.
and they offered TMS therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation. Now, I had been going through therapy. I was on medication at this point, and it wasn't working. And this TMS therapy is something that they only suggest and approve if you've tried other things such as therapy and medication. So I ended up getting approved for this TMS therapy. I went to Florida for 30 days. And what it is, it's like a chair. It almost looks like a dentist chair. And they put this thing on your head and it's a magnetic stimulation. So it feels like a woodpecker pecking on your head. There's this magnetic thing. And they first map your head to look for different areas. Like this area here is for depression. And most TMS places only do that one spot right here, depression. This place I found through that crazy way is they specialized in Lyme disease as well, because the owner's daughter had Lyme disease. They couldn't get rid of it. They tried everything. And they came up with, so there were 3 places that they did. And what they do is they map your head. So they put your hand like this, and they're looking for different spots. And when they find the spot, your hand goes like this involuntarily. So they look for these 3 spots. Okay. They find the 3 spots. And then like here, they do it for 10 minutes, and every 5 seconds, it pecks you 100 times in 2 seconds, real quick. Then back here, it's every 5 minutes or every 5 seconds, it hits another pattern, another. So 3 different patterns they hit on your head. And I did this for 30 days. It takes about 40 minutes for about 10, 15 minutes for each place.
Yeah.
And I went there for 30 days. I walked into this place because I forgot a piece of paper. I was crying. I was crying when I walked into this place. I was in such a bad state. I forgot this piece of paper that I was supposed to bring. I was crying. And so I walked into the place crying, went through this therapy for 30 days, and I walked out a new man. I absolutely was a new man. I was back to myself. I was not suicidal anymore. When I was in that bad spot, in that depressed state, I was suicidal. I had plans, and not until I went through that therapy did I come out a new man. So it saved my life.
Yeah.
I know.
What did it shift for you? What was it about the therapy? Did it just map out different patterns in your brain? Like, how did it help with the Lyme disease, and for you to even have a complete shift in your outlook towards life?
Yeah, and the Lyme disease was still there because it doesn't get rid of the bug. And I prayed to get rid of that, and I think that helped. And I could talk more about that. But the Lyme disease, what occurred when I came out of it, when I was going through the TMS therapy, what would happen is, I don't know, halfway through or something, it's, whoa, I haven't thought of that word in a long time. That came pretty quick. Boy, I was able to say that pretty good, wasn't I? So the words and things just flowed better. So it was opening up something. And so I was able to think clear. I was able to speak clear. I was able to function better. And so it helps me in a lot of different ways. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like it actually improved your cognition. So you weren't really stuck in that fog of depression, as you shared earlier. Is able to, and I think a lot of people talk about this even when they do psychedelic type of therapy, that they're able to see things differently. The patterns in the brain change. Your consciousness kind of evolves. So it sounds like very similar in that sense, that you were able to make sense of things in a different way and connect things differently as well.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Yeah. And then, I know you made reference to the Lyme disease. So how have you been able to then manage that and deal with that as you were going through that process?
Yeah. Like I said, I prayed. And what I did was I prayed. The way that I prayed was I said, it's my intention that Dr. Jesus and I will heal myself of this disease. And as I said that, I took a breath in, and I started from my feet and took a breath in and followed it all the way up to my head. And then as I exhaled, get rid of that disease. And that spiritual energy work, it helped. It helped. I also am taking CBD because CBD helps with the joints and the muscles, and I still get joint and muscle pain from the Lyme. So I think that it's there. And you have to not eat sugar. There's certain dietary things that you don't want to eat as well. So I'm attacking it, if you will, through diet, CBD, and prayer. And I still get symptoms of it every once in a while. It affects me cognitive once in a while. I lose my train of thought sometimes. So there's still that residue, but it's deep. I buried it pretty deep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad to hear that. Well, Paul, this has been really amazing to hear your story and share the lessons you've learned with the audience, especially when it comes to resilience, which again has been part of your journey to be able to go through all these experiences and still come out and have this outlook on life where now you're supporting others. And we touched on it at the beginning of the episode. So I'm glad we were able to bring it full circle. But for listeners that want to learn more about your work, or if they wanted to even see what kind of stuff you're doing, including your book, what are some ways they can find all of that?
Yeah, thank you. The best place to find out what I do and what I have to offer would be to go to my website, pdspeaks.com. Paul Doughty, pdspeaks.com. There you will find all my social sites. You'll see that I'm launching a book, and it's actually coming out on Wednesday, the 5th of February. And you also can see the different, my speech is on there too, what I communicate in my speech to the young adults. There's a demo video on there that provides an overview of that. That's where you can find out about me. Please reach out through the contact form. If you have any questions or comments, I would be welcome to hear those. pdspeaks.com.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. But thank you again, Paul. It was a pleasure to chat with you today and share your story with the audience.
Well, Farhan, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story, and hopefully we will touch some of your audience members. I always say that if I'm able to touch one person in my speech and podcast, whatever, it's worth it. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Yes.